Okay, thank you so much for being here with us today. I appreciate every single one of you for making the time for this webinar. And I want to thank Patsy and Gail from Atlas for all of the support that they give us. I honestly would not know my up from down if they weren't helping to remind me. So thank you so much. Today's webinar is going to focus on using routines to support better learning. Routines are one of those, one of the ACES methods that if you've ever gone through an ACES training, we've talked about before. It tends to be one of people's favorite TIFing methods. And so we decided to devote the first of our TIFty Tuesday webinar series to using routines in the classroom. One moment. My name is Stephanie Sommers. I am the ACES coordinator, and I've had that role for a number of years now, maybe 5 or 6 years through Atlas. I also work for Minneapolis Adult Education. And I am so very pleased to be joined today by 2 wonderful guests, one of whom is with us now, and the other will be joining us in just a little while. She teaches until around 2 o'clock. So with us now is Jitka Sebek from Hopkins Adult Education. And Jitka is going to share with us today some routines that she has used with her students in order to support the development of ACES skills. Do you want to say hi, Jitka?
Yes, hello everybody. Thank you.
I always appreciate it so much when people get an email from me asking them if they wouldn't mind, joining me on a webinar. When they say yes, it always feels like a very special gift, because I know you join us in large part to hear from your peers, other ABE practitioners. And so I'm so very grateful to Jitka for taking time to be here today. And then, like I said, Andrea will be joining us in just a little while. Andrea works for the adult academic program in Robbinsdale, and she's going to be talking with us a little bit about how routines can be a part of being responsive to students who might have experienced trauma who are in our classroom. That will be what she talks about today. All right. At any time, please feel free to put a message in the chat if you have a question, if you'd like to make a comment. We'll be monitoring that chat. I think we're a fairly small group today, and so that is one way that we can make this webinar more interactive, one way that we can make the most of our time together. All right. So for our time today, our objectives are to understand the rationale behind establishing routines in an ABE classroom. We're going to examine examples of routines that have been successfully implemented. Those are going to be coming from Jitka. And then we're also going to learn about some resources, including where to find some newly updated materials that have just been added to the Atlas website and are part of the project we've been calling TIF 2.0, which some of you might be familiar with from trainings at like Summer Institute and also our fall regional events. Okay. Oops. All right. So why are instructional routines important? Normally I don't read things like this out loud, but I don't have a lot of slides like this. So I'll go ahead and read this one. So this is just a little research behind why routines work for our learners. It's simple. Routines are effective because they allow students to focus on what they are learning, not how to go about learning it. From a cognitive science lens, here's what that means. Our working memory, or the part of our short-term memory that handles rapid perceptual and linguistic processing, has a limited capacity. Our working memory either discards incoming information or sends it to our long-term memory. So during a lesson, students' working memories are constantly taking in new information and sifting through distractions and sensory information. So there's a lot going on. Students' brains manage this information by sorting information into existing schemas developed from what they already know, adapting existing schemas or creating new schemas. This is where the cognitive load theory comes in. The idea that by understanding how students' working memory functions, we can avoid overloading the working memory with information. So a routine, of course, would be an existing schema. It would be something students are familiar with, something that they understand. And when we use routines in our class, we are sort of putting less of a burden on our students' brains in a way, which means that they can focus more on what the actual content is that we want them to learn. And they don't have to think as much about what are the directions for this task? How do I do this? Am I doing it correctly? So by kind of taking away those questions, which can be distracting for our learners through the use of routines, we make it easier for them to focus and learn, okay? So if we put that kind of technical information into more basic terms, instructional routines help to reduce cognitive load, or the amount of stress or the amount of effort required by our brains at any particular time. When learners know what is expected during a particular learning task, they don't have to spend their brain power on trying to understand the how of what they are learning, right? Like, how do I complete this? Am I doing it correctly? Did I understand these directions? And if they don't have to think about that, it allows students to put more focus on what they are learning, which can lead to increased understanding and retention of information, okay? And I hope that makes sense to people, that routines are very powerful because they make it easier, in a sense, for our students to be learning new information because they already understand how they are supposed to be doing the task, so they can focus on the specific content that might be new, okay? Oops, excuse me. So as I said before, this idea of TIFing methods has been a part of the ACES training since the launch of the project way back 10 years ago. And if you were around at that time and you did any ACES PLCs or ACES webinars, you might remember this graphic, which has always been one of my favorites. So this graphic represents the idea that part of creating a classroom that is focused on transition skills and preparing our students for what comes next is making our classroom and environment a reflection of the target environment. So we've got these two circles here. The one behind says target environment. The one on top says classroom environment. So if we are preparing our students to enter post-secondary education or training, for example, then we want to make sure we're using the type of academic language that they might encounter in a college classroom, right? We want to set up and establish the same types of norms that we might find in a college classroom, such as working collaboratively in a team to complete a project, right? For technology, that might mean using something like a learning management system so that our students get used to logging in to do a class online or looking for their assignments online in something like Schoology or Google Classrooms, right? A learning task format means introducing our students to the types of learning tasks they might do in college to continue with that example. So maybe introducing them to various types of graphic organizers or note-taking guides that would be similar to what they might see in college. And then, of course, routines. So again, routines and norms can be fairly similar, and we'll talk a little more about that in a few minutes. But you know, creating routines in your classroom around, for example, how students communicate with you, the way that they communicate and work together, arriving to class on time, right? All of those things, when we practice them now in our ABE classrooms, can help to prepare our students for their target environment or whatever is coming next, whether that be college, job training, an internship, or maybe moving on at work. Okay, how many people have seen this before? Can you put a Y in the chat if you've seen this graphic before, and maybe an N in the chat if you have not? Melissa, yes, yes. Jitka, yes. Wonderful. Rebecca, yes. Patsy, Patsy, you have seen this before? And Astrid says yes. Mary Beth says yes. Good. And Keith, okay. So Keith, if you haven't seen it before, I hope my explanation made sense to you. And we'll continue. We'll look. Here is some more information about what we call these TIF methods. Okay. This TIFing the classroom model presents the classroom environment as a mirror of the target environment, which again means the environment into which your students plan to transition, such as post-secondary education and training, the workplace, or increased participation in one's community or family. So it might mean practicing how to communicate during an online parent-teacher conference, right? Rather than joining an online class. Inside the box is the lesson content. So that's what's in the middle with integrated TIF skills, right? Those 6 category of skills from the Transitions Integration Framework, or the TIF. And then outside of that box, within the circle of the classroom environment, are the methods we can use to integrate TIF skills regardless of lesson content. So the idea behind this is we know that you have a lot of demands on a lot of competing sort of demands or responsibilities regarding what you teach your students, right? You're supposed to be doing basic skills preparation. You're supposed to be doing CCRS. They need that digital literacy. They also need these professional skills or soft skills. So every one of your lessons maybe can't specifically be a TIFed lesson, but we can always be incorporating these different methods like routines and norms and technology with our students, so that even if we aren't having a quote unquote TIFed or ACES lesson, we can still be helping our students to prepare for their next steps by creating an environment in our classroom that is going to help launch them successfully into their target environment in the future. Okay. All right. So what I pulled out here is one of my jobs, one of my wonderful responsibilities as ACES coordinator is to facilitate the ACES Foundations course, which is currently in Schoology. And like all Minnesota ABE professional development courses will be transferring over to Canvas sometime this summer. Right now, this course is on ACE or on Schoology, and some of the questions in the course ask people about which TIFing method they use in their classroom. And like I mentioned before, routine seems to be a big favorite with folks. So I pulled out some of the routines that people have shared. I would like to establish more routines in the future pathway discussion by beginning each session with my students, which are usually one-to-one, so a one-to-one teaching environment, asking about their progress on their academic or career goals. I think that making this an expected start would help students to be prepared for our meetings and also reflect on their own progress. Okay, so encouraging goal setting and active reflection could be a routine. I like the idea of establishing a routine that gives students continual practice with developing timelines for assignments or short-term study goals and generating a list of steps to take to complete that assignment or meet that goal. This would give students consistent practice with identifying steps needed to achieve a larger goal. So another way, teachers have been implementing routines around ACES TIF. A couple more. Every day I write a message on the board for students, which always starts with a greeting, then the date. The students copy the message and then fill in the blanks for missing words, correct capitalization, punctuation, spelling, etc. on their own or with someone near them. Then as a class, we go through the message and they indicate the corrections to be made. So another routine. And I am teaching a virtual online science GED prep course, but we have been starting every class with a science news story before we get to the lessons. I have learned that my students know a lot and like to add to the context. For example, last week, we looked at the recent International Conference on the Environment and Use of Fossil Fuels, and they all had details to add from their own experiences. So these are just 4 examples, again, that I pulled out of our ACES course. These were participant responses. And this just kind of shows you how some of your colleagues have been using routines. And in just a little while, we'll hopefully hear from some of you and how you've been implementing routines in your own classrooms that support the development of ACES TIF. So I mentioned a few minutes ago that sometimes a question I get is, what is the difference between a norm and a routine? Okay, so classroom norms are the behavioral expectations or rules of the class, right? We know that the meaning of that word norm, when we say it's the norm, it's sort of like the expectation of how students behave. For example, not using cell phones in the classroom might be a norm. Encouraging students to speak primarily in English, if English is not their first language, might be a norm. Classroom norms inform us how we are expected to behave towards each other and towards the materials we use in school. Okay. A routine. Classroom routines refer to specific behaviors and activities that are taught in order to provide smooth, uninterrupted class operation. So, for example, teaching students how to sign in and out of class, having a routine around where students look to find missed work, for example. Classroom routines, carefully taught, can save large amounts of time during the year. When students know exactly what is expected of them in a variety of situations, the time saved can be spent teaching rather than organizing or waiting. So one way I like to kind of talk about the difference between routines and norms is often something is introduced or explicitly taught by the teacher as a routine. And then if students kind of internalize that and start to do it on their own, or even carry that practice over into other classes or other environments, that's when it becomes a norm, when students kind of own the routine and no longer have to be reminded. So if you have a routine of maybe taking notes or annotating a document, and then after repeated practice with that routine, students do that not just in your class, but in other classes, that might be an example of something moving from routine to norm, okay? And if the difference still seems a little bit muddy, that's okay. They are very closely related, and I don't think it's that important for us to have a very strong dividing line between them right now. But it is a question I get asked, so I thought I'd try to explain it just a little bit. All right. So I have a routine for you. I hope that all of you know that the Atlas website is a wonderful place to go to find all sorts of resources. These are just a few of the many different resource libraries that are curated by people at Atlas, by different Atlas consultants, for example. So we've got the ACES resource library, the Adult Career Pathway or ACP library. We have a library with adult diploma resources, CCRS standards, cultural competency, all of these things. So I hope that you do make it part of your regular practice to go to this website when you're looking for any type of resource, or you want to know what events are coming up, what kind of PD is on the horizon. All of that information can be found here. And Gail chatted out the link to this website. And part of why I'm mentioning this is because the Atlas website is also where you would go to find our new TIF 2.0 lesson plans. So as I think I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, the ACES TIF project started 10 years ago. And this, for the past 6 to 9 months, we have been working on making some updates, kind of giving a freshening up, a new look, a new feel to some of the resources that were created, because a lot has changed in 10 years. We know online instruction was not a big part of our life as ABE teachers 10 years ago. And there are other things as well that have changed. And so we thought it would be a good idea to try to freshen up these lessons and give them a 2023 feeling. So these new lesson plans are being sort of rolled out a few at a time. And if you go to the Atlas website, the TIF 2.0 lessons are in a folder. The link is here, and it's just been chatted out as well. Okay. And so what we're going to do for the next couple of minutes is take a little bit of a deeper look at what the new lessons look like. So one of the things we've done is we've given the lessons a consistent format using a newly updated lesson planning template. So this lesson is related to the Developing a Future Pathway category. You'll notice there's information at the top about the approximate time needed to complete the lesson, the NRS levels, and sort of the background and rationale. This lesson is about a basic informational interview because this is the beginning level lesson. It's got different standards listed at the top. And then a big thing that we're trying to incorporate is helping teachers think about how diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, can be a part of their teaching practice, as well as social emotional learning. So these are some enhancements or key considerations that we are adding to all of the updated lesson plans, and more information about this will be coming during a future ACES webinar, or our next TIFT Tuesday webinar. Okay, so the updated lesson plans are still available at 3 instructional levels, like the original lesson plans. For Developing a Future Pathway, the beginning and intermediate level lessons focus on informational interviews. Okay. Another thing that has changed is we have tried to add some suggestions or guidance around how to deliver these lessons in a variety of instructional formats: in-person, virtual, hybrid. And we're also including differentiation strategies so that teachers can picture using them with a variety of learners. Okay. So those are some other things that have changed with the new lesson plans. And then the actual lesson itself does follow a similar format to the way that they were laid out before, where there's an introduction or a warm-up, an introduction, guided practice, independent practice, and then assessment or extension activities. Okay, this is from the advanced level lesson, which does not focus on informational interviews. This time, the focus is on creating a work portfolio. So this would be a great lesson, both for students who are thinking about going to college. Also, it could be something maybe used as part of a adult diploma portfolio. The materials that the student creates could maybe be used as evidence for the adult diploma. So I have a screenshot here of what some of the activities look like from the warm-up here. What examples of work could be helpful to share with an employer during an interview or at a job fair? So getting students to think about what kinds of information they might need to put into a portfolio to showcase their skills and strengths when they are looking for work. Okay, so this was these 3 lessons were created by Heather Turngren, who you probably know is the Adult Career Pathway Coordinator for Atlas. So she's done a wonderful job updating these and making them really relevant for today. And then the other set of lessons that will be available by the end of this week, there's just a few finishing touches going on right now, are for learning strategies. And so the learning strategies lessons are going to focus on developing a growth mindset and using learning strategies to improve test taking. So those 3 lessons will be available by the end of this week. The Developing a Future Pathway lessons are available now. One of the great readings that's going to be included in the learning strategies lessons is this one from Common Lit called Cultivate Resilience, How to Get Back on the Horse. So students will be reading about the idea of resilience and some of the work around a growth mindset that was done by Carol Dweck, and we'll be sharing some resources for teachers who want to even talk more about this with their students. Okay, so these, again, you can access these lessons through the Atlas website. They are in a Google folder. These lessons are created so that you can download, make a copy, adapt them for your own classrooms. So we hope that you will use them. Okay. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about routines related to these 2 categories, learning strategies and developing a future pathway. So if you're not as familiar with the TIF, or if you haven't looked at it for a while, learning strategies refers to planned methods, steps, actions, or techniques for facilitating and enhancing the learning and the use of new material. Examples in this category include organizing information, reading or listening for a specific purpose, keeping a learning log, note-taking, or making educated guesses. A successful learner knows when and how to apply a particular strategy. Teaching the skills in this category will help learners work with and understand new material more independently. So that's the definition of what we mean when we talk about learning strategies in the TIF. So here's an example of one way to develop routines around learning strategies. This has to do with giving students a text and then having them annotate that text to support their answers. So we know there's a big push in the CCRS to use evidence to support our answers. And so here's how one of our teachers here in Minneapolis does this. She gives the students one of these informational texts. There are these multiple choice questions, but rather than just, circling or filling in the A, B, C, or D, students are encouraged to mark up their text. So you can see where they're using different colors here. The numbers refer to the number of the question. So if the student says for number 1, I chose B, then they also go into the text and show where the evidence is that supports the idea that that is the correct answer. Okay. So here's one example of a routine that you could use with your learners, having them highlight or underline the evidence in the text that supports their answers. And then another idea for a routine around learning strategies is using some sentence frames or sentence stems to get students talking about talking or writing about things you've been talking about in class. And so this is something I do with my students. I teach a reading for social studies class. And very often I do sentence starters that are related to information we've been reading. And this helps my students both to practice their language and their sentence structure, but also it gives me an opportunity to see if they can make a correct sentence based on what we have been reading. So some recent ones I've done, because higher voter turnout tends to favor Democrats. So then I ask my students to finish that. This comes from, we've been talking about voter ID laws and different laws that have been enacted to sort of restrict voting for certain groups. Even though America is a democracy, ... if a person does not have a government issued ID card, okay? So sometimes we're working on using these subordinate conjunctions to make complex sentences. Sometimes we do it with compound sentences, but multiple times a week, I do have my students respond to these kinds of writing prompts. The amount of money spent on elections has increased over the past few years, and the amount of money spent on elections has increased over the past few years. So the amount of money spent on elections has increased over the past few years, but. So you might notice the first simple sentence or independent clause there is the same in each sentence starter, but then the coordinating conjunction is different. And I tell students they have to finish those 3 sentences in different ways, depending on which conjunction is being used. So I sort of alternate between making these complex and compound sentences in my class, but I do this as a routine, and students know when they see the sentence starters that their job is to complete the sentence and put their ideas in the chat. Okay. And then one more routine. So what I just showed you, this I often use as a warm-up activity with my students. This might be more of an exit activity or a way to do some formative assessment. At the end of class, you might have your students finish one of these frames. Today, I learned from the text that, blank. I realized that I did not agree with blank because blank. I still wonder about. Someday I would like to. An important concept is blank because blank. So these types of language frames would be a way for students to sort of summarize or synthesize what you've been talking about in class. They could finish these as an exit ticket, put them in the chat if you were online. And if you do these as a routine, the students get used to the language and they are able to come up with some pretty great sentences that are expressed in a format that is more academic. Okay. So I have been doing all of the talking, and now I would love to hear from some of you. would you please share an example of a routine, maybe related to learning strategies if you can think of one. If you can't think specifically of a learning strategies routine, I'd love to hear about any routines you're using with your students. I'd love to see some of your ideas in the chat. So we're going to pause for just a minute to give people a moment to think and write. So it could be any routine that you use with your learners. I think it would be great for us to see examples, different examples of routines that people are using. So hopefully everyone's able to find their chat box. Okay. And Heather, thank you, Heather. Students in online classes are encouraged to take notes. Yes. I provide a copy of a graphic organizer for them to copy into their notebooks as we read a longer passage. This week it's pro-con. Yes, I've been doing that as well, where I give them a graphic organizer so we can practice note-taking skills. Absolutely. And Christine says, a reflection at the end of the lesson on how the work they did helped them accomplish the daily objective. Yes. So if you know that today we were going to work on making simple present tense sentences, what's something that you did in class that helped you to understand or accomplish that objective? Great one. And Lori says, I am brand new and have taught 3 evenings a GED class. Well, welcome, Lori. I feel honored that this is one of the first things you're doing as a ABE teacher. So, oops, I got to get back to Lori's comment. I don't have many routines yet, but I've started to check in, check out each evening where we review goals for the evening and then goals for next week. Great. So just kind of checking in with students. What did we accomplish tonight? And then let's talk about what we're going to work on in the future. Wonderful. And Jitka says, at the beginning of a class, students finish the sentence "today is" by writing either the date or describing the weather or writing what kind of holiday it is. A banana bread day. Wonderful, wonderful. He says, I use vocabulary logs on a regular basis to help learners think about the words they are learning. Yes, using prompts such as, I know this word in my head, but I can't make a sentence with it. Also great metacognition there, or self-assessment about having students identify how deep their knowledge goes with the word. Great, Keith. And Rebecca, I try to keep my days each week the same. Oh yes, another way to routine is the way we structure our classes each day. Wednesday from 9 to 10 is conversation. Thursday morning is grammar. And yes, my learners notice if I switch up the routine. Yeah, and then I think, you know what, Rebecca, that's affirmation that your routines really have been noticed by your students. And Callie, hi Callie. Lately in our online classes, students are enjoying practicing dialogues with sentence frames in breakout groups. I like that the breakout room routine enables more student-led discussion. Yes. I teach pre-literate ELL students. We do a daily log at the beginning of the day. At the beginning with the day, date, temperature, and how I am feeling. At the end of the day, I get it. We make a list of all the topics we spoke about. If I skip it, they remind me, they want and expect it. Yes, a big part of routines is that they help our students feel comfortable in our classes. And if your students are asking about something that you've made a routine, that means that they are noticing that and that they probably miss it. So excellent. Thank you, everyone. Okay, we're going to just talk for a few minutes about our other category that was discussed today. Yes, Callie, these are all fantastic ideas. I hope you're all learning as much as I am. Developing a future pathway is another one of the categories from the TIF, And this category builds the aptitude to more fully understand one's own skills, interests, and talents, and how these are transferable to a successful career or success in one's family or larger community. Activities include using a variety of data and research methods to identify and choose a potential pathway, goal setting, and learning about the culture of being a professional in the United States. Teaching the skills in this category will help learners to be more self-actualized and purposeful in the choices that they make about their future. Okay, so a few ideas that I came up with about how to use routines to practice developing a future pathway skills has to do with making exit tickets or journaling prompts with your students. So a lot of this has to do with thinking about how what we're learning in class might connect to our larger goals. Okay, so for a more beginning to maybe low or intermediate level class, some prompts might be: what workplace skills did you practice today? What academic skills did you practice today? What do you want to practice more? Or just simply, what did you learn today? So having students maybe answer one of these questions as an exit ticket, or making a routine of writing in a reflection journal after classes a few times a week would be one way to get students thinking about the connections between their learning and their goals. If you have a little bit higher level students, your prompts might be a little more complex. This week, we have learned about X in class. This topic interests me or doesn't interest me because. So thinking about our interests and how that might connect to future work. This week, we have learned about X in class. A possible job related to this topic could be. Okay, so these could also be speaking prompts, I think, or having students do a little writing. Another thing that I'm very big on is the idea of transferable skills and helping our learners be able to talk about all of the skills that they're learning in their classes. So transferable skills are defined as those skills that will help you across a wide variety of career fields or contexts. So it says there are certain keywords in almost every job posting that relate to skills: communication, multitasking, teamwork, creativity, critical thinking, and leadership. These words represent a secret language that few job hunters understand. The ones who do get it are also the ones who get the job offers. That's because these keywords and phrases represent the skills that enable you to do your job well, whatever that job may be. So that comes from an article in Forbes. And we know that oftentimes when you fill out an application or a cover letter, you need to include these key terms just so your application will make it through the screening process. So helping our students be able to talk about their transferable skills or write about them is very important. Here's a few more ideas for prompts. This week, we have learned about X in class. I might be able to apply this in another way by ... X was an important skill to learn because it might help me to ... Okay. Here is another example. This is a little bit of a lower level example, and I did not come up with this. This came from a webinar that was delivered last spring by Rana Maggi and Donna Price. And they had an idea for doing what they call a one-word selfie. So having students come up with a word that they think sort of describes them or represents them, and then having them either explain why they chose that word. They could write about it. They could speak about it. And I like this idea because it's something that would work well in an online class or in an in-person class. And to make it into a routine, maybe this is something you could do once a week on Monday, for example. And it might be interesting to have students practice all of the different words that describe them, their different qualities, for example. So here you can see organized. I am a good listener. I am a good teammate, right? I am reliable. So that's a nice, quick, low prep idea. This is a resource that comes from the American School Counselor Association called the Career Conversations. I love these prompts because they ask students to describe their behavior at a particular time. And these are really important for if students get into a situation where they're being asked those behavioral interview questions, okay? So for example, tell me about a time you set a goal for yourself and stuck to it. If you had more time in your schedule, what would you like to do with it? Okay. Think about a change you went through recently, either at home or school. How did you adapt to that change? So I think, again, these could be used as maybe a weekly writing prompt or conversation group topic. And it gives students an opportunity to practice talking about their own skills and strengths. And hopefully having that practice in your classroom is going to help them if they get into an interviewing situation where they're being asked some of these types of questions, okay? So I know we went through these ideas fairly quickly because I want to make sure I save time for our guests, okay? I've asked you all to share some routines. If anything else came to mind over the past few minutes, feel free to add it to the chat, okay? And Heather said a friend recently asked about online interview questions, and now you could share this with her. Yes, I do think this is a great resource. Okay, so it is now my great pleasure to take a break from talking and invite Jitka to speak a little bit about her ACES routines. And the reason I invited Jitka to come on today has to do with the fact that we have actually been inviting teachers from around the state to submit examples of routines to us, routines they use in their classroom, because we're curating a little library of these. And Jitka submitted 1, then 2, then 3. And she told me at one point how much she was enjoying reflecting on her routines and sharing them. And I thought maybe all of you would enjoy hearing about them too. So thank you so much, Jitka. And here we go.
And it's mutual, Stephanie. Thank you very much for inviting me to present briefly and show all of you fun that we have in class with TIF routines. So as Stephanie explained to us, routines help us avoid overloading students' working memory. And I am certain that all of you use graphs and charts, thinking maps, maybe Venn diagrams, just to implement these examples of routines. And especially if we do TIF routines, that number one, help us teach more effectively. And again, as Stephanie explained, teachers introduce concepts. So that takes a while. And then they model, and then they practice with students, and then they let students practice. So if we want to save time, we can just use TIF routines. And number two, it also helps us teachers focus on goals of lessons or units. I'm always reminded when I start a new unit, maybe traveling, I teach from future textbook. I always say, why? Why am I teaching this unit? Well, traveling, yes, obviously we can continue answering the why question, but then there can be the underlying why. Our students travel back to see their homelands, or they at some point had to travel to Minnesota. So everybody has a story to tell. That chapter in future textbook on traveling does have sample stories, crazy stories about traveling. So it was a really good opportunity to use, for example, this one TIF routine, and that's, let's say, for the speaking modality. So as you can see, it's on the left-hand side, the speaking. So when we were reading with students all these stories, and then obviously students naturally wanted to share their stories, it was a good opportunity to remind them how they can create the culmination in any little story, just to make it more memorable. And yes, they had fun with writing wow or no way. And then that's how they remember it more. So again, when they just see this picture, it's a reminder up, we are telling a story, and it should have the culmination and then hopefully a happy ending after. For the writing modality, we do have favorite TIF routine, and that's the one that you see on the right-hand side at the bottom. Students, when they see the blank picture, they know, oh yeah, 5 parts to any letter, maybe email, note, and they do like this routine because it gives them tools that help them feel more confident by knowing that not only they are polite in English language while emailing to somebody, but that they also know that everything is really correct, that they know how to spell sincerely and how to compose a message. So we have used this routine, for example, being curious about a new principal. I teach at Hopkins School District. So a new principal was hired, and he mentioned that he is a multilingual person, and some of my students have children at the school where he's the principal. So we composed together a very polite message, and students felt very good about it, and we sent him the message and he replied to us. Also, this routine about writing notes helps us make our class more stronger as community. So if anybody is going from one class, and I teach high intermediate, to advanced class, or if anybody gets a new job or passes a driver's license test, you know, I just pull into Jamboard this routine, and because it is Jamboard, students can fill out this routine. In Jamboard, if you use Jamboard, you know that it's important to upload it as a background, otherwise students might accidentally delete the page with the routine. You might, or let's put it the other way, it is again very important, and students appreciate it very much when we use this letter as a routine, so we know about each other. Also, we might even prepare ourselves, or we teachers prepare students for situations when they want to write a note as a sympathy card. How often do we have a chance to prepare for that? It's usually happy birthday or congratulations on a baby. So when students discreetly let me know that they are not able to come for a while to school because somebody passes in their family, we discreetly and very kindly write a sympathy card to the student. So it is a very appreciated situation for everybody. If I may please ask for the second. Thank you very much. And then among the prompts, you also see for the listening module, which could be also used for speaking, yes. And it must be a very familiar prompt. But again, it reminds us, if somebody tells us something, we need to focus on some key information. And that's that where, who, what, or we alternate it for how long or how much or how old. And then when we realize that the answers to these questions are missing, then obviously these questions give us an opportunity to ask the additional questions. So again, that one is very practical and widely known. And the last modality is reading. And for example, this text. So again, if my students struggle understanding some words, and yes, my student just recently asked me, what is pajamas? So I right away slide in the picture with the head, with the flags, and it reminds them, look at the picture on the page, or maybe what's in the context, finish the sentence, what do you know the synonym? Lately, I focus on multilingualism and translanguaging and using language one. So I have added, is it a cognate? Does it remind you of a word that you already know from your language? Or do you want to quickly translate it? Students do have fun, and actually they were impressed in how many languages the word pajama exists. So those are my 4 examples to you in all 4 modalities. Enjoy very much TIFting and using routines. Have fun just like we have. Thank you very much, everybody.
All right, thank you so much. I continue to be so impressed by Jitka's routines. I love how visual they are. I love how practical they are. I love that something like this web graphic for the class potluck. I'm a big fan, as I'm sure most of us are, of sort of template activities where I could have this kind of spider web graphic or mind map graphic ready to go, and all I really have to do is change what's in the center. And so it's a great low prep activity, and my students get used to it, and it's a wonderful way to reinforce those WH questions. So thank you, Jitka. We really appreciate your time today. And if you would like to access Jitka's wonderful ACES routines, as well as the others that have been shared, you can do that on the ACES website, or excuse me, it's not the ACES website, the Atlas website. Under ACES resources, a featured resource are these ACES routines. And not only can you find our library, which I hope to grow, of routines, but we would also love to have you submit a routine. So if there is something that you do in your class with your students, and if you could take a couple minutes and write up how your routine works, and then submit it along with any materials, supporting materials, I would love to add that to our resource library. You do earn 1 CEU for submitting a routine, but you can submit as many as you like. And the template that you see here with the ACES logo in the corner, that is available also on the Atlas website. So again, I would love to issue you some CEUs for sharing one of your routines, one or more of your routines with the field and growing this library. Okay. Does anyone have a question for Jitka or about these routines before we continue? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. Seeing a lot of thank yous to Jitka. All right, well then I am so pleased to be able to introduce our next guest. When we started this work, we had a group of advisors, an advisory team who met with us 3 times over the course of a few months to provide feedback and input into what we were doing. They really helped to guide this work. And having Andrea join us today actually came out of that conversations with that group. They were aware of the wonderful work that Andrea's been doing around trauma-informed instruction, and we thought it was a nice fit with routines. And so I'm so very happy that Andrea Echelberger is able to join us today to talk about an area that she has done a lot of research into, trauma-informed instruction. So thank you, Andrea.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here today. I feel like excited isn't the quite the right word, but I'm glad to be here to talk about trauma. So we're going to start with a definition of trauma, and if you could move us forward. So something to know about trauma is that it's exposure from an incident or series of events that are emotionally disturbing or life-threatening, with lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So that's our standard textbook definition of trauma. Something to know about trauma is that it is not something that is universal. Something that may be very traumatic for one person might be not traumatic at all for another person. And trauma happens across age groups, across genders, across ethnicities, across races, across socioeconomic status. Anybody at any time can experience trauma. All right, can you go, please move us on? So what happens in the classroom when we are talking about trauma? There's something called this hyperarousal continuum. And essentially it's how people come into the class depending on where they are on this continuum. So ideally, everybody would be on the left-hand side where people are at rest. They're not aroused at all. Their cognitive style is very abstract. They can think in abstract terms around abstract concepts, and their internal state is calm. So that is ideal. That's where we would like it if every student started. That's where we'd like it if we were every day of our lives. However, for students who have experienced trauma, or students who are stressed, they might not be starting out there. They might be coming in vigilant, able to think only in concrete terms, and feeling already aroused and anxious. And this can go on to resistance and feeling emotional, feeling alarm, defiance, just reacting, feeling fear. And finally, people might feel aggression, be reflective, lashing out, and feeling terror or that intense fear. So what we're going to be talking about routines today and the idea of trauma-informed instruction is knowing that people might not be coming in at that ideal state. People might be coming in vigilant or resistant. They might be coming in thinking in really concrete terms or already feeling emotional, and they might already feel some alarm or be aroused or maybe even feel fear. So I really like this statement that when a threat to safety is perceived, a person with trauma or a history of educational failure, so people who have been failed by the school system, or humiliation, people who have felt ashamed of their ability to learn, progresses through the arousal continuum that literally changes what part of their brain is running the show. So moving from the prefrontal cortex into more of that kind of the lizard brain where that fight, flight, or freeze kicks in. All right, next slide. All right, so we're going to play a short video that talks about the difference between learning brain and survival brain, and in particular, how that impacts learners' ability to learn in the classroom before we go into recommendations for routines. All right, whenever you're ready. Stephanie, try advancing the slide. Stephanie, did you mean to stop sharing?
I'm not, Stephanie, are you able to hear us?
I'm sorry, guys, I hear you. I'm trying to fix, I'm not very smooth at this. And when I opened, so then I have to switch what I'm sharing, right? So just give me a second.
Oh,
Sure, no problem. Just wanted to make sure.
Able to do it. I'm bad. I'm bad at this.
It's okay.
Let me get this copied and I'll try to get, I should have had it ready to go. I do apologize. All of you are probably like, what the heck? So let me open.
Don't worry about it at all. We've all been there.
Okay, so here is the video, but I need to share it with all of you. Sorry, everyone. Let me do this. Here it is. I'm almost there. This is almost happening. Okay. How?
It's an important thing for them to understand and learn. And I thought that the best way to do it might be to just make a difference between a learning brain versus a brain in survival mode. So we'll just call it learning brain versus survival brain. And this is the difference. So learning brain is this brain that's open to learning new information, and it's completely okay with ambiguity and grays and vagueness. And it sees the big picture. It like pulls back and is on the balcony, can look over the forest and figure out what's going on. On an emotional level, people in learning brain feel calm, peaceful, maybe a little excited about what they're about to learn, maybe a little playful and having fun too, and definitely curious. And they're not afraid of making mistakes because it's just part of the learning process. And so they're not really thinking about themselves. And they actually feel a little bit of confidence that if they just apply themselves, they might pick up what they're trying to learn. Now, survival brain, on the other hand, is completely different. It's hyper-focused on threat. It doesn't like ambiguity. It wants clear, hard facts. It thinks in black and white terms. It doesn't want anything to be gray at all. And then emotionally, you can imagine that survival brain makes people feel panicky, feel like a little obsessive and afraid of getting things wrong. And they don't feel calm and open to learning new things. They just want to get things over with. And people in survival brain also really don't like making mistakes, and they are afraid of looking stupid too. So students in survival brain don't want to be picked on. They don't want to raise their hand and ask questions and look stupid. And so these people are also filled with doubt about their own ability to learn stuff. And they're afraid that other people can see how stupid they really are. Now, it's really important to understand how learning brain and survival brain interact, because survival brain always trumps learning brain. And it makes sense because survival brain is just trying to save your life. And so if it thinks that there's something dangerous happening, you better pay attention to it, right? But the tricky thing is that as survival brain stays on longer and longer, it's harder to get out of that. And it's harder to really go into learning brain. And the way I think about it is kind of like the myth of Sisyphus. You know, that guy who has to push a rock up a hill, and then every day it falls back down and he has to do it over and over again. Well, being in learning brain is like being up on the high parts of that mountain. You can see the expanse of what's going on, but it also takes a lot of work to be up there. And at any second, if you're not paying attention and putting effort into it, it's so easy to slip back into survival brain again. And that rock that Sisyphus is trying to push up, well, that's kind of like stress. And the more stressed you feel, the heavier and bigger that rock gets, and it just pushes you back into survival brain quicker. Now, the kicker is that for traumatized people, stress is a really rigid and intense thing. And so with trauma, any little stress makes that rock grow way bigger than it normally would. And because people with trauma misperceive ambiguous situations as threatening and stressful, that rock just stays big all the time. Now, the good news is that the more you control stress, well, the easier it is to be in learning brain, right? Because that rock is a lot smaller. And what I really want to highlight for teachers is that the best way to keep students in learning brain goes back to why I spent so much time talking about attachment. Students best learn when they feel like they're safe and supported by the adults around them. So it's kind of like a baby elephant. You know how like on those nature shows, the baby elephant is like playing with leaves or exploring a tree or something like that and having a lot of fun. And the only reason why they can do that is because there's a whole group of mama elephants around that baby, protecting it and looking out for danger. So a kid with trauma or who's stuck in survival brain, it's kind of like that baby elephant who doesn't have protective adults around them. They can't play and learn because they're way too focused looking out for threat and danger. So this is why I really believe that the most important thing that schools need to focus on, way more important than any kind of techniques or curricula, is really whether or not they are creating that environment where students feel like they're surrounded by these big mama elephants who are going to protect them and watch out for them and make them safe. And when students have that, I bet you it unlocks their curiosity, their eagerness to learn, and play as a way to learn. So I hope that's helpful. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Thanks.
Okay, and I am trying to successfully switch back. I think I can do it. I'm working on it.
So while you're doing that, I can talk.
Okay.
I really appreciate that video for a number of reasons. Obviously, we're working with adults, not children. However, I think a lot of it really rings true for people, that while we are not going to be the mama elephants standing around, we probably all recognize students who are in survival brain. We've probably been there ourselves when we're feeling really stressed or anxious about something. And one of the best things we can do is make sure that students, for adult students, that they have what they feel is a safe environment. And so what this means is having high structure. So having classes that are structured, learners know what to expect, to know what is expected of them, and having high warmth. So that people feel welcome, like they're part of community, like they belong, like people want them to be there. And that's where some of the suggestions that Jitka had was so important, because they help to create that classroom community. And routines, as we're going to see, are what work to create that high structure that helps people feel safe. All right, next slide. So some things that we can do, we want to make class safe environments that tap into trauma-informed recommendations. So here's the idea of what that structure might look like. Right, can we go on to the next one? I'm going to start with a grounding activity. Do a check-in, an opportunity to relate. Then we learn the new concepts. Then we have the opportunity to reflect on learning. And finally, there's a closing. And can you go to the next one? And then ending with a grounding. So this obviously doesn't have to be how every class runs. But what we do want to do is make sure that we keep the plan the same and predictable week to week. All right, next one. So let's do a quick example of what that grounding practice, when we were talking about a grounding practice. So I'm going to stop talking for just about 30 seconds. I'm going to ask everybody to follow along with this grounding practice to help regulate ourselves to be ready to learn. All right, I'm going to start talking again. I love it when I do a session where I have a grounding practice like this in it, because whenever I'm presenting, I need to relax and calm down. So it's good for me as well as demonstrating what a simple grounding activity can look like. All right, next slide. So let's talk about some ways, some routines we can use to build warmth and connection. We might build connection through daily or weekly group check-ins, so seeing what's going on in people's lives. Having a routine where we celebrate life events, like somebody moving up to a next class, birthdays for it would be some examples. Get to know learners and give them opportunities to learn about each other. And this might be routines where you have those daily questions where they're asking one another. Doing regular partner interviews, anything where you are giving students regular opportunities to check in with each other and interact with one another. And something else that is really important to do, thinking about making sure people feel safe and that they feel comfortable in the class, is letting people know, setting norms and being really clear about what the norms are so that people can take care of themselves as they need. So this can be, is it okay if people stand up and move around the classroom if they need to? What happens if somebody needs to go to the restroom, needs water? Are they supposed to wait for the break? Is it okay if they go? We're working with adults. It's probably okay if they just go. But making sure that that's really clear to people, because people probably won't just assume and know what to do. Next slide. Okay, let's do a quick, we talked about that connecting. Let's do a quick connecting activity. So can everybody type in the chat, what weather are you today? And then just a word or two that describes why. So for example, I could say, today I am foggy because last night I didn't sleep very well. So I'm going to pause and let people put in the chat. What's your weather? And a quick note about why. Seeing cloudy, stormy, foggy. Anything else? Okay. Right. So as you're looking at this and you're looking at the things that are coming through, notice if there are other people that have the same weather as you. I'm seeing a lot of partly cloudies. And someone who I see put partly sunny. I like that is seems a little bit more optimistic. All right, so that's an example of how people can connect and could be a regular routine that you do. Let's go on to the next slide. So we talked about the importance of decreasing hypervigilance. So when people come in and they're on that arousal continuum and they're coming in and are feeling overly vigilant, which makes it very hard for people to learn because they are in survival brain. What are some instructional things that we can do? All right, move forward, please. Providing consistency and structure is number one. So that's where we need to use routines, and we want to let learners know the changes ahead of time. So for example, springing a surprise reading test on learners while you might have more students in the classroom that day is not going to help people feel like they can do their best work, because it might easily push them into survival brain if they weren't expecting it. Far better is to let people know for maybe a week or two, even two in advance, that there's a test coming up. We're going to practice for it. If you can't make it that day, no problem. We'll have you do a makeup test when you come back. But we don't want to spring surprises on people, or, you know, today we're going on a field trip, or today we're going to go and do class interviews with a totally different class. We want people to know those changes before they happen. And if we can, depending on the level of language that learners have, we want to explain the purpose behind the activities in the routine so that students have some buy-in and they know the why. Next, please. And we want to be transparent when we're explaining changes to the routine. Why is it happening? Not just what is happening. Another thing that we can do to decrease that hypervigilance that can be a part of just our regular teaching routine is building in additional wait time, where after we ask a question, ask for a volunteer, give a prompt, we are pausing and we are waiting for students to be able to have the time to think through what they want to say, think through what question they want to ask or how they want to answer it. And when we do this, you'll find that students tend to feel a little less scared and panicky because they know they'll have time to think through things. Next. Some more strategies for decreasing hypervigilance. Making brain breaks a part of your regular routine. People who are stressed or have experienced trauma are going to have shorter working memories than students who are feeling really relaxed and calm. And so those brain breaks are really important, and it's actually going to be good for all of the students. Brain breaks don't have to be a full-on 5, 10, 15-minute break where everybody gets to have tea and talk. They can be little things like getting up and doing some movement or stretching, having students find a new partner and move to a new table, something that has them shut off their brain that's thinking about the language or the skill that they're learning and focus on something else that is simple for a little bit. One of my favorite things to do is have students match up pictures to find their partner. That would be an example of this very simple brain break. Making gratitude, talking about what's going well, a part of your daily or weekly routine. Next slide. So this could be something like a writing prompt. Today I am thankful for, and students fill in the blank. Or one good thing that happened to me yesterday or last week or over the weekend was. So encouraging people to think about and remember the good things that are going on in their lives. It can be very easy to focus on the negative. Or thinking about things that they are looking forward to and are excited about, even if they're really, really small. And another thing we want to do is build in review and provide students with opportunities for success, because nothing makes us pay more attention and feel better about ourselves than doing something well. And so why it's really important that students have productive struggle, there also has to be some time where they get a chance to look back and see how much they've learned and apply that in a way that makes them feel good about themselves. So regular review of previous concepts or repeating activities is really important. And when you're able, allow for structured choice within your daily or weekly routine. So this might be, here's 2 activities we're going to do. Do you want to do this one first, or do you want to do this one first? All right. That is all I have to say about trauma. If people have any questions, you can put it in the chat and I will go ahead and answer them the best I can.
Yes, and I want to thank you, Andrea, for all of these great ideas. I feel more relaxed just having sat through the past 15 minutes or so. I really enjoyed hearing from you and all of these really practical ways to help our students feel more centered in the classroom. And I'm going to engage in a gratitude practice right now and say, today, I am thankful for both Andrea and Jitka giving of their time and their talents to share with all of us. And I am thankful for all of you who joined us this afternoon. I know you have so many things going on in your daily lives and your work lives. And I really appreciate that you would take time out to join us for this webinar. So thank you. I am grateful for all of you. All right, to end today, I just want to remind you, we have 2 more TIFT Tuesday webinars coming up later this spring. Next month on March 21st. This one is possibly changing just a little bit. It's going to be focused mostly on thinking about bringing DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, into our classrooms, probably less about culturally responsive teaching. And we will also be introducing 2 new set of updated lessons from the TIF. And then in April, we'll have a webinar on April 18th that will be focusing on differentiation strategies and social emotional learning. Okay. That is it. I hope that you are able to join us for our next webinars. The registration is available now, I believe, through the Atlas website. I want to again thank Gail for all of her tech support, and thank Patsy and Astrid for being here today as well. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. Otherwise, you can certainly always reach out. My email is here. Gail will be sending you a PDF version of these slides sometime tomorrow or before the end of this week, along with a link to an evaluation of today's webinar. So please do fill that out if there are topics you'd like us to talk about in the future. We'd love to hear those ideas. So thank you all. Thank you. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Great.